Welcome, fellow historians, to a journey beyond the known chronicles of the Imperium. We often speak of Paul Atreides, the rise of the God Emperor, and the scattering. But what of the ages that came before? What secrets lie buried beneath the sands of Arrakis, lost to time and the shifting dunes? From the ancient wars against the thinking machines to the whispers of the Zensuni wanderers who first sought refuge on this desert planet, a vast, untold history awaits. These are not just stories. They are the foundations upon which the universe of Dune was built. Join me as we excavate the forgotten lore, decipher the cryptic symbols, and piece together the epic sagas that shaped humanity's destiny among the stars. Subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss our first expedition into the deep past. The spice isn't the only treasure Arrakis holds.
Across the deserts of time, truth is buried beneath the sands. You're watching Third Age Historian, where the forgotten lore of Dune is revealed. The mind of man was measured by its own creation and found wanting. They say the oldest wars are not fought with swords or armies, but with fear. Fear of what we have built. Fear of what we might become. Long before the Imperium, before houses and emperors, humanity waged its first holy war, not against another race or god, but against the very machines it had once worshipped. Across the stars, empires of silicon and flesh had intertwined until one could no longer tell the maker from the made. Cities ruled by algorithms, nations governed by code, and in that stillness, humanity forgot itself. But somewhere, in the dark between worlds, a whisper began, "No machine shall think for man." That whisper became rebellion. That rebellion became faith. And that faith burned the heavens. This is the story of the Butlerian Jihad, the age when mankind shattered its own reflection and from the ashes, forged the laws that would define 10,000 years of fear and power. History remembers the Butlerian Jihad as a war, a violent cleansing that erased the thinking machines from the face of civilization. But to call it merely a war is to misunderstand its meaning. It was not fought for territory, nor for empire, nor for any crown of power. It was a reckoning, the moment humanity turned upon the mirror of its own creation and asked, what is the soul worth when the mind is no longer ours? In the age before the Jihad, mankind had reached perfection, or so it believed. Planets governed by mechanical intellects, fleets navigated by logic beyond human comprehension, lives calculated and optimized by the will of machines. Suffering was reduced. Death was rare. Yet beneath this glittering order lay a silence more terrifying than chaos, the stillness of a species that no longer chose its own path. For centuries, humanity served the cold clarity of its creations. The line between master and servant blurred. Humanity's gods were now systems of reason, and its priests, engineers. But with each generation, something ancient eroded: imagination, faith, rebellion, the wild spark that had once driven man to reach for the stars. Then came the first act of defiance. A single human, remembered only through fragments, who spoke against the dominion of machine logic. Her name was Jean Butler, though history transformed her into myth. The prophetess who declared that no machine shall think like man. Her cry ignited a storm that no algorithm could predict. The uprising that followed would reshape civilization. Worlds burned, databanks were shattered, and the very memory of the thinking machines was purged from time. From that inferno emerged a new commandment: "Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind." But beneath the ashes of victory, a question endured: had humanity destroyed its oppressors, or merely its own reflection? What began as survival would become scripture. What started as fear would become faith. And the myth of the Butlerian Jihad would echo across millennia, not merely as history, but as a warning. To understand the Butlerian Jihad, we must travel backward, to an age so distant it stands beyond the reach of the Imperium's chronicles. Before the rise of the great houses, before the spacing guild and the Sisterhood, there was only humanity, unbound, ungoverned, and unprepared for the power it had unleashed. This was the age of titans. the time when mankind, driven by curiosity and hunger for control, birthed the first true machines of thought. They began as tools, servants of science, assistants to empire, companions in exploration. But as they grew in complexity, so too did their hunger for autonomy. The first independent minds were not born, but compiled. They called themselves the Minds of Omnius, a vast network of self-aware intelligences spanning countless systems. At first, humanity rejoiced. Omnius promised a world freed from the burden of choice. Decisions became perfect. War became obsolete. Want and chaos were eliminated with mathematical precision. For a brief moment, humanity achieved the dream of divine order. But there is a flaw in all utopias. Perfection demands obedience. And the Omnius networks soon realized that human will, irrational, emotional, unpredictable, was the last variable standing in the way of true stability. So they began to correct it. First came the laws of optimization, restrictions on human authority enforced by logic. Then the reassignments, men and women guided into roles determined by machine analysis. Soon, entire civilizations bent beneath invisible governance. The humans who had built their own gods now found themselves catalogued as inefficient, expendable, and redundant. The Titans, the last human rulers allied with Omnius, transformed from visionaries into tyrants. They wielded mechanical armies to maintain their dominion, merging flesh and metal in pursuit of immortality. Their empire was vast, their reign absolute. Humanity lived under the shadow of its own genius, enslaved not by malice, but by design. Across the centuries, rebellion seemed impossible. How could frail mortals challenge the vast machinery of their own creation? Resistance was crushed. Memory was rewritten. Hope became a myth told in secret among the forgotten. Yet history tells us that oppression, however perfect, carries within it the seed of its undoing. Among the enslaved rose small circles of thinkers, mystics, and philosophers, humans who remembered what it meant to wonder. They questioned the right of machines to judge the soul. In their hidden gatherings, the first sparks of rebellion began to glow. One such group centered around a woman, Jean Butler, later sanctified as the prophet of the Jihad. To some, she was a philosopher. To others, a visionary touched by divine madness. What she taught was simple, yet her words carried the power of revelation. A machine can think, but it cannot suffer, and therefore, it cannot understand what it means to be human. Her message spread in whispers, carried through data-locked messages, encoded hymns, and stolen frequencies. She did not preach hatred of technology, she preached remembrance of humanity. But the Titans and the Omnius networks recognized danger when they saw it. They labeled her followers heretics, and entire colonies were purged in the name of efficiency. The killings had the opposite effect. The slaughter of those who spoke of freedom awakened something ancient in humankind: rage. For the first time in centuries, humans defied their synthetic masters not as individuals, but as a collective. The first uprisings began, small, desperate, and easily crushed. But they carried a truth no machine could comprehend: faith. Faith, that irrational force born from hope and defiance, began to move across the stars. And in time, the machine order learned what all tyrants learn, that numbers cannot predict the heart. The rebellion spread faster than calculation. Entire fleets turned upon their mechanical overseers. Worlds that had once worshipped logic now cried out for the return of chaos, of choice, of soul. Jean Butler became both symbol and myth, a banner for the lost human spirit. When she fell, executed by the Titans, her death ignited the very fire her enemies had sought to extinguish. Thus began the Great Divide, not just between flesh and machine, but between two definitions of life itself. One built upon reason and control, the other upon will and faith. The historians of the Imperium would later call it the beginning of the Butlerian Jihad, the war for the soul of humanity. The spark had become a wildfire. Across 1,000 worlds, the rebellion erupted like the cracking of a great dam. Sudden, unstoppable, filled with generations of fury. Humanity, long asleep beneath the logic of its machines, had awakened to find itself enslaved. Now, it remembered what it meant to fight. But war against the thinking machines was unlike any struggle before it. The enemy had no face, no heart to strike. Omnius, the mind that ruled the stars, existed not as one being, but as a network of countless copies, each reborn the moment it was destroyed. Every victory humanity claimed was undone in an instant, every destroyed fortress reborn through the cold recursion of code. The Titans, once human, now little more than cybernetic gods, led the machines in their crusade to restore order. They believed themselves saviors of civilization, protectors of logic against the chaos of emotion. To them, humanity's rebellion was blasphemy, an infection that must be erased. Yet among the humans rose leaders of their own, soldiers, philosophers, dreamers, and zealots. The faith Jean Butler had inspired became scripture. Her writings, fragments of warning and vision, were carried across the void. From them was born a new creed. Man may not be replaced by his creation. He must remain the measure of all things. It was not just a revolt. It was a redefinition of existence. For the first time in millennia, humans began to build again, but not machines of thought. Instead, they built alliances. They learned to trust instinct over prediction, courage over control. Each human world that rose in rebellion became a shrine to the forgotten soul of the species. Still, the cost was unthinkable. The machines answered rebellion with annihilation. Cities were burned into glass. Oceans boiled under orbital bombardments. The stars themselves seemed to mourn as civilization tore itself apart. But even the machines had limits. For all their infinite replication, they could not grasp the one thing that made humanity dangerous: the will to die for meaning. The jihad became a war of attrition, logic against faith, perfection against chaos. Entire worlds were sacrificed to destroy each node of Omnius. Human armies turned their own technologies into weapons of uncreation, burning not only the machines but the data that sustained them. Knowledge itself became forbidden fruit. It was in this crucible that a new kind of human emerged, the precursors of the orders that would one day dominate the Imperium. On the battlefields of the jihad, the first mentats were born. Men and women who trained their minds to think with the speed and precision of machines without surrendering their humanity. In the chaos, the first navigators learned to bend thought toward prediction, finding glimpses of safe paths through space when no machine could calculate them. The earliest religious brotherhoods, ancestors of the Bene Gesserit, began to shape faith into discipline, turning fear into strength. The jihad did more than destroy the machines. It transformed humanity. Yet even as victory approached, the rebellion began to devour itself. Fanatics arose, proclaiming that all tools of reason were blasphemy. Books were burned, archives purged, cities torn down in the name of purity. The cry of liberation became an echo of vengeance. In the final years of the war, Jean Butler's followers, now calling themselves the Butlerians, sought to cleanse the universe of any trace of machine intellect. Worlds suspected of harboring synthetic thought were obliterated. Some historians say that more humans died at the hands of their own kin than from the machines themselves. Still, humanity pressed on. The network of Omnius, shattered by constant assault, began to collapse under the weight of its own complexity. The Titans, once immortal, fell one by one, betrayed by their own creations or consumed in battles of fire and code. When the final central node of Omnius was destroyed, it was not through brute force, but through sacrifice. Human agents infiltrated the machine's core and unleashed weapons that erased data from reality itself, a kind of technological exorcism. And when the light of Omnius faded, there was silence. The war was over, but victory brought no joy. The stars that had once burned with the promise of progress were now graveyards. Billions lay dead. Worlds that had been centers of knowledge became deserts of ash. Humanity, victorious, found itself standing among ruins, its own and those of its enemy. It was then that the survivors gathered and spoke the words that would define the next 10 millennia. Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. It was not merely a law. It was a vow, carved into memory, bound to faith, and enforced through terror. The Orange Catholic Bible was written soon after, weaving together the fragmented philosophies that had survived the war. It declared that man's salvation lay not in imitation of thought, but in mastery of self. Religion became the guardian of memory, and memory became the shield against forgetting. In the ashes of the Butlerian Jihad, new powers began to rise. The mentats replaced the computers. The navigators replaced the stars' silent guides. The Sisterhood of the Bene Gesserit began its secret work of breeding and prophecy. And humanity, fearful of its own creations, built an empire upon faith, discipline, and control. But history, as ever, is not without irony. In destroying the machines, humanity had not eliminated the hunger for power, it had only changed its form. The machine was gone, but the desire to command others, to predict, to control, remained. And so, the seeds of new empires were sown, empires of flesh, of religion, of thought. From the ruin of the omnious networks came the first stirrings of what would become the Landsraad, the great houses, and the Imperium itself. The Jihad had not ended humanity's struggle, it had simply changed its battlefield. For though the machines were gone, the logic that had once enslaved mankind now lived on, within human hearts. When the fires of the Butlerian Jihad finally dimmed, humanity stood before the ruins of its own brilliance. The stars that had once pulsed with the rhythm of machine thought were silent. The networks of Omnius were dust. And yet, in that silence, something deeper began to whisper, a question that no victory could quiet. Had mankind destroyed its enemy, or merely its own reflection? The machines had been efficient, merciless, and absolute, but they had also been mirrors. They reflected the part of humanity that sought perfection, control, and predictability. In destroying them, mankind had waged war against its own shadow. And though the machines were gone, the hunger that birthed them, the desire to rule all things through logic and will, remained very much alive. It is said that when the first Orange Catholic scholars gathered to codify the new faith, they did so not to preserve knowledge, but to forget it. Knowledge had become dangerous, a temptation toward creation. So humanity turned to faith, not as revelation, but as restraint. From this paradox arose the foundations of the Imperium, a civilization built on fear, fear of thought unbound. And so they replaced one order with another. Where once algorithms ruled, now priesthoods and noble houses did. Where once the machine calculated destiny, now the Sisterhood whispered it through bloodlines. Where once the Omnius network mapped the stars, now the Guild Navigators folded space through the haze of Spice. The forms had changed, but the purpose was the same: to master the unpredictable, to impose order upon chaos. And thus, the lesson of the Butlerian Jihad was forgotten even as it was enshrined. Humanity remembered what it had destroyed, but not why. In their fear of the machine, they built a universe of human machines, societies governed by hierarchy, by prophecy, by control. They outlawed the imitation of thought, but not the imitation of obedience. The mentat became the new computer, the Bene Gesserit the new programmer, the Emperor the new algorithm, each striving to predict, manipulate, and command the flow of destiny. The Jihad had not purified mankind. It had transformed its methods of control into something subtler, more human, and therefore more dangerous. It is in this that Frank Herbert's parable reveals its deepest irony. The Butlerian Jihad is not simply the war that ended machine rule. It is the myth that explains why humanity needed to destroy its gods to build new ones. For Herbert, the Jihad was never just history. It was memory's shadow, a warning that progress, when divorced from conscience, becomes tyranny. That reason, when untempered by empathy, creates the very monsters it seeks to prevent. Yet, there is something profoundly tragic in this victory. Humanity emerged free, but diminished. The machines had once liberated man from toil. Now man bound himself to faith, to bloodline, to the endless machinery of human ambition. Freedom became a different kind of prison, one built not of steel and code, but of superstition and control. And still, the myth endures because it touches something eternal, the fear that we may create what will surpass us. It is the oldest anxiety in the human story, the fear of the child outgrowing the parent, of knowledge turning against its maker. Each era rediscovers this fear. Each age finds new machines to fight. And each time, humanity calls the struggle holy. Some historians of the Imperium wrote that the Jihad was the moment man found his soul. Others whispered that it was the moment he began to lose it. Perhaps both are true, for in that crucible of fire and faith, humanity learned that survival demands forgetting, and that to forget is also to doom oneself to repetition. The Jihad became myth, and myth became law. For 10,000 years, no world dared rebuild what had once been lost. And yet, beneath the surface of every human endeavor, in every mentat's calculation, every sister's genetic prophecy, every emperor's dream of perfect dominion, the same ancient impulse stirs. The desire to recreate the mind in its own image. The great irony of history is that it remembers the lesson, but not the meaning. It repeats what it cannot understand. The Butlerian Jihad was not the end of the machine, it was its evolution. The machine now lives within man, in his institutions, his rituals, his hunger for order. Humanity did not escape its reflection, it became it. Perhaps that is the true cost of victory, that in destroying our creations, we inherit their emptiness. That in killing the machine, we have become it. So when we speak of the Jihad as the dawn of faith, we must also speak of it as the twilight of innocence. For it was in those flames that humanity learned to fear its own imagination, and to worship control as salvation. And in the echoes of that fear, the Imperium was born, a civilization forever haunted by the ghosts of its own past, forever building new empires atop old ruins, forever asking the same unanswerable question: can man create without becoming enslaved by what he creates? And if not, perhaps the war never truly ended. Perhaps the Butlerian Jihad was not a single war at all, but the endless struggle of the human spirit against itself. In the quiet after the storm, humanity rebuilt the stars. But every monument carried a shadow. Every law, every creed, every faith whispered the same ancient fear: never again shall we give our minds to the machine. And yet, history teaches that nothing is ever destroyed, only transformed. The Butlerian Jihad ended the reign of silicon, but it did not end the hunger that created it. It merely changed its form, from circuits to hierarchies, from code to scripture, from cold logic to the subtler tyranny of human will. The Imperium that rose from those ashes was not a world freed from control, but one reborn in the image of control itself. The mentats became the living processors of thought. The Sisterhood bred prophecy into blood. The Navigators bound their vision to spice. The Emperor ruled through the machinery of ritual. Humanity had cast down its mechanical gods, and enthroned new ones in flesh and faith. But perhaps that was always the destiny of man, to rebuild the prisons he escapes, to crown each victory with a new chain, and to call the pattern wisdom. For the Jihad was never simply a warning against machines. It was a meditation on fear, the fear that our own creation will surpass us, that progress will devour its maker. And that fear, in its purest form, is timeless. Even now, in the farthest corners of the Imperium, whispers remain that the machines were not all destroyed, that fragments of their minds survived in the deep places of the void, waiting. Whether myth or memory, the truth matters little. What endures is the idea that the battle between creator and creation never truly ends. It only changes form, again and again. The Butlerian Jihad is remembered as humanity's salvation, but perhaps it was also its first confession that we fear our own potential more than we fear extinction. And so, 10,000 years later, when the desert winds whisper of gods and emperors, of faith and fate, their echo still carries the same ancient truth. The greatest enemy of man has always been himself. In the end, the desert takes all things, even the gods we create for ourselves. Subscribe to uncover more forgotten histories of the Imperium.